billionaire had unjustly fired his black servant from home. When Angelina Jolie found him about to freeze in the park, the time for justice and reckoning was about to come. Amy, what hole did this woman disappear into?" Richard Blackstone's angry voice echoed through the luxurious corridors of the mansion on Beacon Hill. The gold Rolex in his hand showed 9:15 a.m., and his maid, Amy Lopez, had not started work at 8 a.m. for the first time in 3 years. Amy had been preparing Richard's coffee, arranging his newspaper, and coordinating his daily schedule every morning at exactly 8 a.m. for the past 3 years. Not once in 3 years had she been late for work or failed to complete a single task. But this morning was different. "This is unacceptable," Richard shouted at his assistant, Martha. "Where did she disappear to before my most important meeting?" Martha shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe she's sick, Richard." "Sick?" Richard laughed dismissively. "These people always use sickness as an excuse. They have no sense of responsibility." But what had happened to Amy was very different from what he thought. At that moment, the young woman was waiting by her mother Rosa's bedside in the cold light of the sterile hospital corridor. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she was still wearing the clothes from the previous day. Her 60-year-old mother had suffered a heart attack in the middle of the night and been rushed to the hospital, and Amy had been keeping vigil at her mother's bedside ever since. "My daughter," Rosa whispered weakly, "you should go to work. Don't let my condition interfere with your job." "Mom, this isn't the time to think about work," the young woman replied, holding her mother's hand tightly. "Your health is more important." But her mother was right. This job was Amy's only source of income. Her mother's medication, the rent, everything depended on her salary. The $700 she received weekly from Richard Blackstone was the only thing keeping this family afloat. Amy took out her phone with trembling hands and called Richard to tell him what had happened. The phone rang 3 times. Then that cold, familiar voice came. "Amy, where are you?" "Mr. Blackstone, I'm so sorry," Amy explained breathlessly. "My mother was taken to the hospital. She had a heart attack. I'm coming right away, just—" "I don't care." Richard's voice was icy. "Your personal problems don't affect my business. I have important clients coming this morning, and the house is a mess. Please, just give me 2 hours. As soon as my mother's condition stabilizes." 2 hours. Richard laughed sarcastically. "Amy, this business is built on reliability, and you've just caused me great embarrassment today." The young woman's heart pounded as she begged, "Mr. Blackstone, please. I've never been late since I started working here. This is a one-time thing." "A one-time thing." Richard's voice grew harsher. "People like you always find an excuse. Today it's your sick mother. Tomorrow it's your sick child. The day after that, it's some other tragedy. I can't work like this." "People like you?" Amy's voice was filled with bewilderment. "Mr. Blackstone, That's it, Amy. Come back this afternoon to get your things." The phone went dead. The young woman stared at the phone, her eyes filling with tears as she held her mother's frail hand. But she couldn't cry because she didn't want to upset her mother. "What's wrong, dear?" Rosa asked anxiously. "Nothing, Mom," Amy lied with a fake smile. "Everything's fine." But nothing was fine. When Amy arrived at the Blackstone mansion 3 hours later, Richard greeted her with cold professionalism. "All your belongings are in this box," he said without looking at her. "And here's your last paycheck." Amy looked at her personal belongings in the box, then tried one last chance. "Mr. Blackstone, please listen to me. My mother is really in the hospital and—" "Amy." Richard finally looked at her, his eyes showing no mercy. "Don't you understand? I care about results, not the reasons. You decided you didn't want to be here, and I decided I wanted someone else." The young woman wanted to cry, to scream, but she just shook her head. "I understand. For 3 years, she had worked hard at this job, often away from home, putting her own life on hold to make Richard's life perfect. And in a single moment of crisis, all that sacrifice was forgotten. But very soon, this ruthless boss would pay dearly for his injustice. That evening, as Amy walked through the streets covered in wet snow, she saw that every job listing said, "References required." Richard's last words echoed in her ears, "You're unreliable." For 3 days, she roamed the freezing streets of Boston, knocking on doors. In every cafe, restaurant, and cleaning company, the same question: "Why did you leave your previous job?" And each time, Amy's story sounded less convincing. A sick mother, a heart attack, an emergency. These were just excuses to employers. Each rejection extinguished a little more of the young woman's hope. For 2 weeks, she tried to get by on the money in her pocket. But the accumulated rent, her mother's medication, food, the money was disappearing quickly. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, had been understanding the first week, but by the second week, he had posted an eviction notice on the door. As if all that weren't enough, she had also been hit hard by the landlord. Tonight was her last night in the house. She spent the entire next day at the hospital with her mother. However, when evening came, hospital security asked visitors to leave, and the poor woman, with nowhere to go, was left alone in the freezing cold. The eviction notice hanging on the apartment door prevented her from entering. Her only option was the street. Unable to find anywhere to go, the young woman went to a park and sat on a bench. But this was a very dangerous decision. Her old coat was no longer enough to keep her warm, and she tried to curl up by pulling her legs up to her chest. As the Boston cold seeped into her bones, knowing that her mother was in a warm bed at the hospital gave her some comfort. When Amy closed her eyes, she remembered the words Richard had said that day. People like this. It was as if she wasn't a person, just an object that could be replaced. As the hours passed, the cold grew more intense. The poor woman's pulse was slowing, and she was beginning to lose consciousness. Just then, the sound of high heels came from the other end of the park. It was Angelina Jolie herself. Angelina had been at a meeting in a Boston restaurant for her new film project. After the meeting, she told her driver she wanted to walk a bit. She wanted to breathe in the cold air of Boston's snowy streets and calm her thoughts. However, she was about to encounter something she never could have imagined. As she walked through the park, where the lights illuminated the dark paths, she happened to be heading toward where Amy was. Angelina was wearing a black coat, large sunglasses to protect her eyes from the snow, and a black hat, completely concealing her identity. At that moment, she noticed a young woman sitting on a bench who had fainted. "My God!" she whispered, and rushed over to Amy. Angelina's heart was racing. She had spent years working in humanitarian aid around the world and had witnessed countless tragedies. But the sight she saw on that cold winter day deeply shook her. The young woman's lips were turning blue, and she was barely breathing. Angelina immediately took off her coat and covered Amy with it, then called an ambulance. "This is an emergency. I found a young woman who's about to die from hypothermia." She gave the address of where she was. Her voice was authoritative and urgent, and the operator on the phone sprang into action. She then checked the young woman's pulse. It was very weak. She fixed her eyes on Amy's face and began to speak words of encouragement. "Hold on, sweetheart. Just a little longer," she whispered. The poor woman, who was half conscious, felt Angelina's warm hands on her face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Amy," she whispered weakly. "Amy, I'm here. You're not alone. Everything will be okay." The ambulance arrived at the scene within 4 minutes. As the paramedics rushed Amy onto a stretcher, Angelina also got into the ambulance with them. "Are you a relative?" they asked, not recognizing Angelina. "Yes," Angelina replied without hesitation. In the ambulance, one of the paramedics informed Angelina about Amy's condition. Her body temperature is critical. She's probably been out there for hours. Angelina held Amy's hand and spoke to her again. Amy, we're in the ambulance. You're a strong woman. I know that. Amy's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she looked at Angelina. There was gratitude in that look, but also deep exhaustion. It was as if life had already defeated her. When they arrived at the hospital, the emergency team immediately took Amy to the trauma room. Her body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, and there was a risk of organ failure due to hypothermia. Body temperature 34 degrees, the nurse shouted. Start the warming protocol. While the doctors worked to stabilize Amy, Angelina paced nervously in the emergency room waiting area. A growing sense of unease filled her. Why was this woman living on the streets? Where was her family? Where did she work? Questions swirled in her mind. As Angelina waited in the hallway, she noticed a pay envelope fall from Amy's pocket. The Blackstone Industries logo on the envelope caught her eye. Blackstone, she murmured. She recognized the name well. Richard Blackstone, one of Boston's wealthiest businessmen. A billionaire frequently featured in the media who portrayed himself as a philanthropist. Angelina's brows furrowed. If Amy worked for Blackstone, why was she freezing on the street? Something wasn't right. She examined the envelope carefully. It read, "Final pay," and the date was very recent. Amy must have been fired. 2 hours later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell came over to the woman. Amy's condition is stable. We saved her from hypothermia. Were you the one who found her? Yes. I found her in the park. She was almost frozen. Dr. Mitchell shook her head. If you had been an hour later, we would have lost her. You saved her life. Doctor, how is Amy overall? Is she only suffering from hypothermia? Dr. Mitchell paused. Physically, she's fine, but she's showing signs of severe stress, prolonged sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and she seems very exhausted psychologically. It's as if she's been through a major trauma. When Angelina entered Amy's room, the young woman was slowly opening her eyes. Under the warm blankets, she was finally safe. You saved me, Amy whispered weakly. I just did what was right. By the way, you work for Blackstone Industries, don't you? She asked, searching for answers to the questions in her head. Amy's eyes filled with tears. I worked as a maid for 3 years, for Richard Blackstone, when my mother had a heart attack. He fired me on the one day I was late. He showed no mercy. Angelina's face tensed. The truth was coming out. Amy, if it's not too much trouble, could you tell me exactly what happened? I often encounter situations like this and may be able to help. Amy tried to wipe away her tears. It's a long story. I have time, said Angelina, pulling her chair closer to Amy's bed. And I want to hear it. Amy took a deep breath and began to tell her story. As Angelina listened, the expression on her face grew increasingly stern. This wasn't just about being fired. It was a human tragedy. Angelina clenched her fists in anger. How did they fire you? He yelled at me on the phone. People like you always make excuses, he said. I was late once because I had to take care of my sick mother and I lost everything. He said, people like you? Angelina's voice was low but full of anger. Yes. He spoke as if I wasn't human. For 3 years, I cleaned his house every day, cooked his meals, and entertained his guests. I neglected my own family to make her life perfect, and in one moment of crisis, all that service was forgotten. Tears streamed down the poor woman's face as she told her story. I looked for work, but I had no references. Richard had said I was unreliable. I couldn't pay the rent, and I was evicted. My mother was in the hospital, and I was out on the street. Angelina gripped Amy's hand tightly. This was the perfect example of how the wealthy treated their employees like less than human beings. Amy, Angelina said firmly, I have a question for you. Do you want everyone to know what Richard Blackstone did to you? How he threw you out onto the street? How mercilessly he treated you? Amy paused for a moment. She was afraid, but she also didn't want the cruel man's actions to go unpunished. Yes, she said firmly. I don't want others to go through the same thing. But how will that happen? Angelina smiled, but there was a quest for justice in that smile. The woman slowly removed her hat. Then she took off her large glasses. Amy blinked, looked again, then gasped. Standing before her was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. The actress famous for her humanitarian work, whom she had seen countless times on the big screen. Angelina Jolie, Amy whispered, breathless. Angelina smiled. Hello, Amy. And yes, the whole country will learn about what Richard Blackstone has done. The young woman was still in shock. But why? Why are you helping me? Because no one deserves to freeze to death on the street after serving others. And because tyrants like Richard Blackstone must pay the price for their actions. Angelina took out her phone. Amy, with your permission, I'm going to share what happened with the media. The whole country will see Richard Blackstone's true face. Amy nodded. Maybe other people won't have to go through the same thing. Angelina made her first call to CNN. This is Angelina Jolie. I have a very important news source. It's about a billionaire businessman named Richard Blackstone, how he threw his maid out on the street, and how I found her freezing to death in the park. In the hours that followed, Amy's room would be filled with reporters. Her story would quickly make headlines across the country, and Richard Blackstone's life would be completely turned upside down. If this second chance story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a billionaire's life completely collapsed and how Amy emerged victorious from her darkest moment. Because Angelina Jolie's next move will change everything in a way Richard Blackstone could never have imagined. The next morning, Richard Blackstone opened CNN as usual while sipping his coffee, and his world came crashing down. Breaking news. Angelina Jolie is accusing billionaire Richard Blackstone of ruthlessly firing his maid for being one day late to care for his sick mother. The young woman, Amy Lopez, was found in the park on the brink of death from hypothermia. Richard dropped his coffee cup. On the screen, Amy was giving an interview from her hospital bed, with Angelina Jolie sitting beside her. I never missed a day in 3 years, Amy said tearfully. When my mother had a heart attack, I needed to be at the hospital. But Richard Blackstone said, people like you always find excuses, and fired me. Angelina turned to the camera. I found Amy freezing in the park. No human being could be that cruel. What Richard Blackstone did is unacceptable. Richard's phone started ringing wildly. His assistant Martha rushed in, panicking. Richard, all the news channels are calling. Social media is exploding. Justice for me is trending. This is impossible, Richard shouted. She was just a maid. How could... Angelina Jolie is supporting her, Martha said, showing him the screen. She told the story to her 50 million followers on Twitter. The whole country is talking about you. When Richard opened Twitter, what he saw left him speechless. At Angelina Jolie Official, Amy Lopez served faithfully for 3 years. She was fired for being one day late to care for her sick mother and nearly froze to death in the park. Richard Blackstone lost his humanity by treating her this way. Justice for me. The tweet had been retweeted 5 million times in 2 hours. The comments were harsh. Richard Blackstone is an inhuman monster. To treat someone who served you for 3 years like that. Shame on you. Angelina is right. This man must be punished. Justice for Amy. Boycott Blackstone. This ruthless man's entire image was shattered. Within an hour, Blackstone Industries customers began canceling their orders. Richard's assistant was constantly on the phone. The Peninsula Hotel Group is canceling the contract. Morrison Construction is ending the partnership. The Grant Foundation is withdrawing its donations. Richard's partner, James Wilson, burst into the office, his face bright red. Richard, what did you do? The company's stock value has dropped by 30%. Investors are pulling out. James, calm down. This is just a temporary storm. Temporary? James opened his laptop. Wall Street Journal headline, Financial Times. The moral collapse of a billionaire businessman. This isn't temporary, Richard. This is the end. At that moment, Richard's lawyer, David Morrison, called. Richard, the situation is very serious. Amy Lopez is initiating legal proceedings against me. Unfair dismissal, salary rights, compensation, and Angelina Jolie is providing her with free legal support. Richard's world continued to crumble. On the lunchtime news, an economic expert was speaking on Bloomberg TV. Blackstone Industries' brand value has suffered irreparable damage. Personal scandals like this destroy a company's image. It's nearly impossible for Richard Blackstone to recover from this crisis. That evening, Richard was forced to hold a press conference to try to salvage the situation. Journalists bombarded him with questions. Mr. Blackstone, what do you have to say about firing a woman who worked for you for 3 years because of her sick mother? What did you feel when Amy Lopez was freezing to death in the park? Angelina Jolie is accusing you of being heartless. Your response? Richard was sweating and stammering. This is a misunderstanding. There were issues with Amy's performance. What performance issues? The journalist asked. She says she never missed a day in 3 years and never failed to complete a single task. Richard's prepared statement collapsed. Unable to withstand the pressure, he finally said, I'm very sorry. I wronged Amy. I apologize to everyone, but it was too late. The damage was irreparable. Meanwhile, as Amy recovered in the hospital, her door was constantly filled with visitors. Angelina was providing her with not only legal but also personal. Meanwhile, Richard Blackstone was struggling with bankruptcy lawsuits. The value of his company's shares had plummeted. 80% of Blackstone Industries had been sold, and most of the employees had been laid off. The Richard Blackstone downfall case became a case study at Harvard Business School. Professors taught their students how a leader's lack of character can destroy an entire empire. Amy now arrived at her beautiful office every morning, while Richard passed by his old mansion. Standing in front of the door where he had once fired her, he began to understand how Amy felt. Angelina summarized the young woman's story in a TV interview. Amy Lopez showed me that true power lies in compassion, the pursuit of justice, and never giving up. Richard Blackstone showed how arrogance and a lack of empathy can destroy a person. Amy's mother, Rosa, was now receiving treatment at the best hospital, with all expenses covered by the foundation. In her new apartment, the young woman held her mother's hand and said, Mom, we have nothing to fear anymore. Richard Blackstone's story ended with a painful lesson. Wealth and power had made him look down on everyone, until the injustice he had done to a single maid spread throughout the world. Amy Lopez, on the other hand, narrowly escaped death on a freezing night and achieved the greatest victory of her life with the support of a world-famous actress. Because sometimes the darkest moment is the silence before the brightest beginning. True power lies not in money or status, but in humanity. Amy Lopez proved this, and Richard Blackstone paid the bitter price. If this incredible story of transformation and justice touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories showing how real heroes rise from the deepest depths and how the disease of arrogance can bring down empires. Because Amy Lopez's story is just the beginning. There are thousands of stories around the world still waiting for justice, and their time to see the light of day has come.